I am calling the Wednesday, November 17th, 2021 Code Review Task Force meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. The clerk will note the following members are not present. I believe, let's see, actually, can I get a current readout? I think we're missing.
I'm sorry, I didn't bring that to you, but it looks like we're missing task force member Tim Hull.
Okay.
Joshua Walls, Eric Cameron, Donna Jensen, and Sarah Albrecht.
Okay, thank you. And so we currently have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members, which means we do have a quorum, so business can proceed. That's great. Thank you, Ms. Collins. Members of the public may attend in person or participate online via Zoom at zoom.us/join and typing in meeting ID :918-3509-3225. Once you log into the meeting, please use the chat feature to tell the moderator if you wish to speak to a particular item. More information is available in the agenda packet on the city website. Now on to the agenda. The first item is the adoption of the agenda. City Manager Lee, does staff have any changes to the agenda tonight?
No, we do not.
Okay. Do any task force members have any changes? May I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Okay, may I have a second?
I will.
Okay, moved and seconded by Godan and Shelley. To adopt the agenda, all those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Those opposed, say nay and raise your hand. The motion carries.
Why are we raising our hand? And
So
voice?
that people can see. Ms. Collins?
Okay. Member Nyson. Basically, it's because I have a really hard time hearing if one person says no or two people says no, so that I can keep an accurate count of who votes yes and who votes no.
So we could skip the voice.
There you go.
Okay.
All right, approval of minutes. Item 2 of the agenda is approval of minutes from October 27th meeting. Does staff have changes to the minutes?
We do not.
Do any task force members have changes? May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, can I get a second? I'll second. All right, the motion to approve the minutes has been moved by Member Ward and seconded by Member Roush. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Those opposed, say nay and raise your hand. The motion carries. Review outstanding items. City Manager Lee, do you have any updates?
Yes, thank you, Chair. At your last meeting, the task force made a recommendation for council consideration of reducing the quorum from a simple majority to, it was the number was 5. Thank you. The council had that on their agenda last night. They did discuss it, and they have decided that they will keep, this task force will keep the simple majority. So 50% plus 1 will be a quorum, and at this point, we won't be reducing it to 5.
And can you provide any comment to their justification?
Oh, I always hesitate speaking for the council, but what I'll say is the discussion focused around, this was a one-time occurrence. We did end up having a resignation, which would have addressed that at that time. And it is really standard for all of our commissions to have a simple majority to take action.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other outstanding items?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Item 4 is questions and comments from the task force. Do the city's attorneys and staff have anything to add?
Chair, if I may,
Yes, please.
and maybe this should be considered outstanding items, but do we want to cover the rules of order that are in front of everyone? And I can conduct this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we can do that now, or miscellaneous is fine, so
Yes.
certainly.
So members of the task force, you have in front of you a City of Burnsville Code Review Task Force Rules of Order. This is just, it's consistent with the Roberts rules. It's more streamlined. So to provide guidance for the task force as they go about making motions. And we will have this on the agenda for next meeting for possible formal adoption of the rules of this body. But for right now, this is kind of advisory. Again, it's consistent with the Roberts Rules of Order. But if you have any questions about the types of motions that you might need to make before you tonight, this will be kind of a guide.
And I think on that note, I believe that in discussing this with City Manager Lee and council, I think that their recommendation was that at the next meeting, we formally adopt these as our standing rules. This would be our first level of precedence rules for us to follow. Tonight, that would be out of order because to change the rules, you need to have a full notice to let people know. And so I think that I would be looking for a motion to consider putting this on the agenda for next month, whether or not to have this be, I believe, voted on and adopted. I think that would be appropriate. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe we can just put it on the agenda. Maybe we can just put it on the agenda. Okay, just put it on the agenda. And then we'll have the vote on it, I guess, next month and make that official. Thank you. I think then we'll go back to the questions unless there's any other outstanding items.
No other outstanding items, Chair.
Thank you. Yes.
I don't think that my questions and comments have been addressed here. It seems like there was a bit of a mix-up as to when everything was due.
Okay.
And to be honest, I don't have the whatever to try to get into the Dropbox. I don't really know how right now on someone else's computer. So I might be asking more questions than you would normally think I could or should as we go along. So just wanted to,
Sure.
in all honesty, I have struggled with the Dropbox. I have seen other members saying they have struggled with the Dropbox and the form. I was told that a lot of my information got cut off on the form and I resent it as it were. Anyway, so.
I had the same problem with that Dropbox because I have my own Dropbox where I use and my computer wants to go there. And it's a Dropbox. It doesn't say, it has a name for it. So is it a city Dropbox? Is it my Dropbox? So I put it there and then asked Megan to check and see if she can see it. And she said no. And so I sent it to her. That's how I manage that process because my computer recognized only mine. Then I looked through the questions I had and I'm not sure they're addressed or not. One of them seems to be addressed, but not the others. Not a big questions, but.
Were the questions, so our next item of business will be to review and finally approve Title I, Chapter 7 through 12. Was anything, I assume it was all about Title II?
Exactly right.
Okay, so I think then as we jump into Title II as item 6, that if you feel like your questions weren't answered, we can bring those up and go through it at that time. Okay. If there are no further
Nope.
Okay.
Sorry.
If there are no further comments or questions on this item, we will then move to the final review and approval of Title I, Chapters 7 through 12. Do the city attorneys or staff have any comments? Do any task force members have any further comments? No. Okay. May I have a motion to approve the final version of Title I, Chapter 7 through 12?
So moved.
Moved by member, go ahead, how do you say your last name?
Namboodiripad.
Namboodiripad?
Yes.
I'm going to get better at that. Can I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by member Hull. As presented and or, all those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. All those opposed, say nay and raise your hand. The motion carries. Item 6, review Title II. Item 6 of the agenda is review Title II. These chapters were included, I believe, in tonight's packet. And the final version of these chapters will come before us for approval at the next meeting. So I think that I believe what I would suggest for kind of a flow is similar to what we've used before. I think there's approximately 6 chapters to Title II, and that we could maybe take it one chapter at a time and just go sequentially. And if members have comment or questions, then we can handle them in that order, if that seems acceptable. So the first chapter on the Planning Commission, are there any comments or questions? Yes.
In the addition to 2-1-2B, the very last phrase, and be held to the provisions of 11817, which someone asked to have added. Is that a reference to a statute, an ordinance? I don't know what that means.
That's ordinance. I think that's the provision on ethics.
Okay. As long as everyone knows what 11817 is.
We should have that in the front part of the package, so.
Yeah, as part of the final reading.
The reference to the city code 1-8-17.
Yep, and that's the gifts and favors section.
Which is fine. I just,
Oh, sure.
I want to make sure everyone knows what we're.
what
talking about.
11817 means, yeah.
Absolutely.
Would it be helpful to clarify it if we added?
Just even city code, or,
Yeah.
you know, what, yeah,
Okay.
that'd be great.
Thank you. Are there other comments and questions? Yes, member.
Not just about 2.1, but basically Title II seem to have advisory commissions and departments. And if I were to start new, I would put, these are advisory ones, these are departments. I don't know whether you want to change it, but it reads better when I see it, which one is which?
Chair, if I may.
So I'm going with the council. Go ahead.
This kind of goes back to the issue of comments being in Dropbox and task force member Namboodiripad not having his comments recognized. So because your comment was sort of an overarching one, which was consistent with a comment from Manager Lee, I just decided that we could talk about it at the outset here. So for discussion about how this whole title is organized. Does that make sense?
So, Ms. Collins?
I'm happy to organize these so that they're more in a fashion. If it says that we're dealing with commissions and departments, then I'll have all the commissions listed first and then all the departments so that it looks a little more organized in that fashion before final adoption of the council. That's something that we had looked to do anyway.
A question I have, what is the difference, generally speaking, between a commission and a department? I assume the department reports to you, city manager, and the commissions report directly to the city council.
Yeah, Chair, yes, the commission is an advisory, has an advisory role. A department is a professional staff role.
Okay. I personally think that Member Godin's suggestion makes a lot of sense to group them together so that departments and commissions are grouped likewise. I think that would, because I noticed that as well, that they were jumping back and forth. I thought that was interesting.
Will happen
Yeah.
for the next review.
Okay.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. I was kind of curious on the notes, the actual PDF I'm looking at. I see a lot of comments on the side, and I see commented by JF1 and NL2R1 and JS3 and JS5. I'm trying to understand, can you help me understand what should I be reading from that?
Chair, so the comments on the side are representative of two different groups of people. So some of these comments are from city staff and staff who are particularly, an expert in this area. So you're going to continue to see that as we go through the code review. As we've gone along in terms of the comments on Dropbox, when there's a specific question, I've tried to put that in a memo and then answer it. When it's more of a general question or something, maybe a specific type of an editing thing, I've been just kind of cutting and pasting and throwing those in a comment box on the side. Maybe that's not the easiest to read, but that's kind of how I've been trying to make sure that I get all of your comments and questions in the right place.
Mr. Chair, thank you. For those who aren't familiar with working in Redline, JS is just your initials and it's the number you put them into the document, I think is the key thing that may be missing in some people's
okay.
minds.
So JS is you in this case.
I can't learn from it, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. That was the missing link. Thank you very much. Other comments or questions specifically on chapter 1, the Planning Commission? Hearing none, let's move to chapter 2, Emergency Management. Yes, sir.
Is emergency management a department or group, or is there a need to say what it is? And I'm just, emergency management to me is a kind of almost like a verb, or as opposed to an emergency management department. So is there a need? I'm not saying that it should change, but emergency management to me.
Not very clear what it is.
Huh?
Sure, it's not
Is
clear.
it
if it's
emergency
a-
management organization?
Can you respond?
I'd be happy to, Chair and task force members. And statute requires that we adopt an emergency management organization, which in our case is made up of city staff that are assigned to that role.
Yeah, why not we call it then emergency management organization? I'm just, to me, that makes clear what that intent is.
And I think that's what 2.2-2-3 speaks to. I think it formalizes that, which is what we're supposed to be doing under statute. But I don't know why we couldn't put it under the title if that's the board's wish.
To me, that's more clearer.
Yes,
I
please.
didn't want to speak out of turn.
No, that's fine.
My thought is it's a category of the code and organization is addressed later because it's talking about the policy first. And that isn't part of the organization. It's what governs the organization. So I don't think it's appropriate to add that to the title.
My own feeling is that you can have a title, yet you can say what is policy there and how it is organized. Basically what you're saying is that there is two parts to this. One is the method or policies. The other one is how you do it. And can be all under the same title. At least to me, it doesn't change anything to have that title.
What do other people have comments? Thoughts on the matter?
I don't necessarily on the title per se, but the whole concept of 223, I have some questions about, which I'm not sure organization, I understand that we've struggled to find the right word. So I guess I don't think the word organization helps clarify it. I understand wanting something else in the title besides emergency management, but I would suggest that we struggle some more to come up with a better description.
Okay.
Would the word provisions help clarify?
How about if you change to emergency management policies and organization? Those are the two areas which are, it's a mouthful, but those are the two areas addressed by this. One part is
Policy
the
and organization.
policy and all that. So emergency management, policy and organization.
Is there any statutory requirements with this?
I don't believe so. Gina,
No,
I'm not aware of any.
I don't believe so either. Agree.
Chair,
Yes, please.
I wonder if, is the struggle somewhat, because it's in this title when we're talking about commissions and departments and really this is just sort of kind of outside of it, you know, it's as mentioned, it's policy, but it's organizational layering on top of the departments that we have. So I don't know if that, you know, if somehow this was pulled out and put somewhere else, would that make it easier for everyone conceptually?
So are you, excuse me,
Please.
are you proposing, you know, rather than departments, commissions, and emergency management, something, a third category in this chapter?
Yes, or maybe, I think if there's a different title for it to go into, that would make more sense in the code.
Yes, please.
Is there a section on city manager, and would this fit under city manager since in effect you're running it?
Right, I think we talked about where statutory plan B city and everything that's underneath that falls within. I'm looking at the statute right now, which is always dangerous for a non-attorney to look at, but I'll ask our counsel perhaps, is there any language in there that requires us to have the standalone provision?
Shannon, do you have it up?
Yeah, I do have it up, and there's nothing in there that requires a standalone provision. I mean, the whole ordinance itself, or state law itself, talks about how a political subdivision like a city has to establish a local organization for emergency management. So I think that separating it out has perhaps helped maybe procedurally from a perspective of, you know, this is just established by state law that cities have to establish this emergency management organization. And maybe this has just helped clarify to state entities, here we are with our compliance with the state law with this specific provision where we're complying with the statute. So, but certainly, I mean, I wouldn't be against any state law to incorporate that as part of a larger ordinance or under different headings, as long as it complies with this, with the terms of the state law.
I wonder if maybe just the title of Title II, literally the name of Title II might be changed to say Commission, Department, and Emergency Management, since emergency management is neither a department or a commission. I wonder if that would help clarify.
Chair,
Yes, please.
Mr. Chair, yes, I do believe that would help clarify the broader issue here and indicate that it belongs.
Do you feel like that addresses your concern? Mitchell?
Yes, I think that, it looks as though this kind of serpentines in and out of itself throughout these other sections too. So I think that that's a great idea. Before you had said that, my thought was that it could be combined with the emergency management governmental function. I mean, those pieces in itself right there start to really get into the nuts of and bolts of what this one is. So obviously this generate much more fodder in regards to how this would get dissected out.
So I think then the consensus I'm feeling is we'd like to see Title II renamed to be commissions, departments, and emergency management. And I think that would clarify. Yes, Ms. Collins.
Sorry, I just had a thought. It looks like the departments that are in here would all follow, emergency management would all fall under public safety.
No,
Interesting.
that's a good point.
Interesting.
So commissions and public safety.
So I guess a question I have, so like the water department, which I think of as a department, which is like a team, you have people to do that, but that's not laid out in the code then? Okay. That's interesting.
Well, it's all in the policy. Procedure manual, isn't it, that you have all of those things?
Yeah.
The finance department and the
You got it.
whatever.
Yeah.
Other
Those
important things.
non-public safety departments. Is there anything that statutorily requires any of this to be laid out in ordinance? Meaning the departments.
I don't think that there's anything statutorily that requires us to have it laid out in ordinance. It's very common to have, some framework laid out in ordinance. Kind of have to think about whether or not I would recommend one way or the other where we would remove it. I think it, to me, it makes more sense to sort of reword the title name so it's clear what you're getting into, more than taking that out.
It looks like there may be some BCA requirements in here too, so. Anyway,
Just a thought, Jared, and this is, I don't know the statute about this, but is it possible that we could remove the departments and emergency management and make it a policy?
Yeah, I would certainly have to look into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was just, that could be a cleaner way to clean this up because we only have a couple departments in here and I thought it might fit better in our policies and procedures manual.
I think I'll ask this back to the board. I think, to me, I personally still lean towards, I think commissions, departments, and emergency management, I think still to me is more clear, even though the departments are just public safety departments, fire and police. But do people have a differing opinion? Yes.
I think I support what you're saying. And I'm not sure how much work it is, but I think to one of your points, it kind of goes around, like it covers planning commission, then it goes into emergency management, police, fire, and then it goes to parks.
We can
You-
change
you
the
would
orders.
think,
We'll fix the order
and
of
put
that
all
before we
the-
adopt the final.
all the pieces that are related to public safety in sequentially and not kind of bounce around.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, I think that seems to be our consensus, to reorder Title III, and then to change the overall title of it to be commissions, departments, and emergency management. Okay. Thank you. I believe, are there other items? Yes, please.
This is one of the items I had noted, I thought, in my previous comments. To me, it seems important to know in writing here, if I'm understanding it correctly, that everyone who's going to be a director, a coordinator,
Can
have-
just where, when you say here?
223.
Thank you.
That these people have other jobs, that this isn't something that will be a person or a contract for which that is all that they will do. For some reason, to note that this is going to be internal to the city. My experience in other places is that the emergency management function is something that's contracted with some emergency management guru, specialist, whatever. And they do the planning. And then once in a while, they meet with the organization, they talk about blah, blah, blah. This seems more embedded in the organization, and or those people who will be designated the director or coordinator are going to have other jobs most of the time, if I'm understanding this.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
A couple sections up, there's actually a section that says emergency management forces. And it kind of lays out like who should be involved. And it says this includes personnel from city departments, authorized volunteers, private organizations and agencies. Does that mean that this is not, does that kind of spell out who are the actual, who can be active participants in this?
Yes.
Maybe I can try to talk about how, from a practical standpoint, how we approach it. So within the police department, we have one of our sergeants who is our emergency management director. So he kind of is the convener of all things EOP. Then we also have our various departments that have a role within emergency operations. If we look at this last storm, for example, we worked with private companies to get the trees removed. And so we want to partner as much as we can, but it's driven by city staff makes those decisions in alignment with the council's direction and any emergency orders that are in place. That helps clarify kind of a practical standpoint.
Would it be fair to compare it more to a role? For example, you're the city manager, but you also fulfill 3 other roles. I mean, I'm a mother, but I'm also a head of compliance. I wear many hats. And I think that's really what I'm seeing in here.
I think that's a good clarification, Shelby.
Yes, please.
Chair, if I may, just to Task Force Member Ward, just to kind of take away from that, this is, as the city manager noted, this is coming from state statute where the organization is the term laid out in state statute, so that carries over into the ordinance. As we go along, we're going to see some of these terms of ours from state statute that, while we might not like them and they may not make a whole lot of sense, they're going to be in the code because it's a direct link to what we're required to have. You may see some of that in the liquor chapter, Title 3. When we go through that, there's going to be some archaic language that we want to try to make better, but there's some things that we probably can't. And then just in terms of that city staff element, making it more clear in the definition of emergency management organization, which actually precedes 2-2-3, it says the staff element. So maybe if we just make that clear and say the city staff element, and even make another notation in 2-2-3 that it's city staff, just to kind of reiterate that that's the bulk of the organization's staff.
Police are considered city staff?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that I'd like to see a proposed language for that, to see how that, if that reads better. Do people agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Please do that.
We'll realign it all too based on the task force ask as well.
I know at the forefront of the International Building Code, there's a section that references scope and administrations as maybe an idea of being a little bit more direct on what we're trying to cover. as well as being broad without being vague. You can track all that, but administrations does kind of cover quite a gambit there of what's within here too. Thought.
Is there a particular change that you recommend then?
Well, in regards to emergency management, perhaps it could be emergency policies and administrations, or, you know, something to that line. Not that it has to be decided on, but
You mean the overall title?
the overall title. Yeah.
Okay, certainly.
I'm sorry. Yep.
Thank you. Are there other questions or comments on emergency management? Yes, Member Roush.
222, about 3 down, it says emergency management forces. Should it be emergency management staff?
We can take a look at that language.
I think then it's
In
just a
alignment
little
with what I
clearer.
think we're hearing from the task force. We'll wordsmith some of that and bring it back for further direction and discussion.
Do you have another one?
One other question. So during the violence a couple years ago, how did the policy work?
Which violence?
Violence?
Like after George Floyd? How, did you use the policy and how effective was it?
So we actually were under an emergency order based on the pandemic. And within that, all of these provisions would fall into place. With any unrest, we didn't really have any here. We worked with our colleague agencies. If there was we were hearing something was going on, but we didn't have to activate our EOC per se as a result of any particular unrest situations. It was simply our police department was continually watching and we were in regular contact.
All right, thanks.
Yes.
I'd like to move that we just leave the label emergency management. If you look at the dictionary definition of the word, it addresses the act of controlling, it addresses the people and the decisions made. And I think it is the appropriate word to use in the title, regardless of whether people have some bias about what that word means or not.
Okay, so I'll refer to our fun sheet here. So Shelley used the magic word move. And so can we get a second on her movement?
I'll second her movement.
Okay, so the movement, I'm gonna restate it, is to leave the title alone and leave it as emergency management. So all those in favor of leaving the title at emergency management signify by saying aye and raise your hand. Aye. All those opposed, say nay and raise your hand. There is one opposed and it's Member Code. The ayes have it. Thank you. We will move on. Are there other items? Yes.
224E, talking about needing an emergency plan, and I don't know if this language is pretty much lifted also, but it implies that a report and a plan could be done once and never looked at again. And I'm just wondering if that's something that we're comfortable with, or if there's any reason to designate some sort of mandatory review every, I don't know what, 2 years or 3 years or something.
Thank you. We do review this on a regular basis for simple logistical updates as well as a comprehensive review, which is what we're doing this year. So from an operational standpoint, it is our best interest to make sure we've got updated plans in place to provide the service we want to provide.
Okay. Other items?
The whole chapter.
For anything in emergency management?
I would like to address a little farther down in 227, there's unchecked power to spend money there in an emergency. And I would like to propose that somehow we look at something that makes sense so that the city has the authority to do what it needs to do in an emergency situation. But there's no opportunity for collusion or corruption where you have 3 to 5 people who say, hey, we can do this and let's throw out $1 million here, and the taxpayers end up footing the bill.
Chair and task force members, from a practical perspective, what this does is it allows staff to be able to bring services on site or rent the appropriate equipment without having to go to the council for specific authority. So right now, anything over $20,000 has to go to the council for formal action. This allows staff to, if we need to bring somebody in with a backhoe and just get things done, we can do that. We don't have to wait for a council meeting. It does not mean it's unchecked or that it's not audited or there aren't checks and balances in place. It just provides a streamlined process in a time of emergency.
That makes sense. Is that $20,000 outlined in the code, or where is that?
It's statutory.
Statutory?
Great. Go ahead.
Task force members, it is also outlined in our financial management plan, which is part of our policies and procedures, kind of on the admin side, the city manager's point. The city council would also take affirmative action on any staff decision following that decision in an emergency situation. So the council would still need to ratify or approve whatever it is the city manager or staff might have done in terms of the expense of public funds. I would also say that during any emergency situation that year, the council's, internal auditors would do a specific audit on any emergency action. So there's several layers outlined, not only in our financial management plan, but also in accordance with state statute.
That clarification helps immensely.
When you say internal auditor, what do you mean? Someone on staff or a firm that you contract with?
Chair, task force members, great question. Every 5 years, the council will consider auditing services. It's a third-party external vendor that the council hires. And then staff works with that auditor to conduct a complete audit of our internal operation.
Thank you. And then you mentioned the $20,000 statutory number. Is there a higher number, or is it just however much the credit card will allow, so to speak? Before how does that approval work? I mean, is it 100,000?
Cases of emergency?
Yeah.
We set the approval for 100,000, I think, last year during the pandemic, during the emergency order.
Okay, and I would assume that would be for any one, I assume that's not for the whole of the emergency, but for any one particular item.
Indeed, that is
Okay.
correct.
Gotcha.
And chair, task force members, that also is action that the council took in that emergency situation to raise that authority.
And then who is, I don't mean this in the negative sense, but who is liable if an employee spends something unauthorized? Like, how does the city not just go without the money, so to speak?
I would look to our city.
So if I'm an employee of the city, it's an emergency, and I spend $100,000 and I hire my brother-in-law to do backhoe business, and, I shouldn't have. That's probably illegal, but how does the city get their money back or not pay that or?
Insurance.
Okay, Greg, you can weigh in if I go
Yep.
astray here, but from a practical standpoint, we have standards and procedures on how we would enter into contracts with folks. And there are certain, I call them conflicts of interest that would preclude that. If we were in a situation where we paid for services and we didn't get that service, or there's some conflict there. Well, if we didn't get the service, we paid for it, we didn't get it, then there's a path to recover that, a legal path to recover it. If an individual's perspective, that agreement, that contract was not appropriate, I think if the service has been completed, we'd probably be obligated to pay that, but there would be personnel, a pathway for somebody who did not comply in alignment with our policies, our practices, our expectations, and our policies and our practices. So kind of a couple different pathways there. Does that answer?
Okay. Member Rush?
You probably also have an approved vendors list or not.
Chair Task Force member, you're correct. We do, not all vendors are on an approved list. Obviously, there are situations, again, in our financial policies that would outline how that process might work. But to the city manager's point, there are many layers of controls when it comes to those internal staff decisions around who provides city services, who approves them, and how many layers of approval based on the cost or the situation that needs to go through. Much of that is automated, which means that guys like me who might miss something are reminded of some of those things through our internal automated approval system. So if something comes across my desk, by way of example, for approval under our financial standards or our purchasing authority, those systems help me to make good decisions and provide some check and balances themselves.
Thank you.
In the event of employee negligence or willful misconduct, isn't there an insurance policy that would actually protect the city and cover the loss of an egregious amount like that? Okay.
Yes. City, absolutely.
I have a question on 228, if I'm interpreting correctly. The last sentence says, nor shall it be employed in a labor dispute. I'm not exactly sure what that means. I'm wondering if someone can clarify. I think what that means that if, just hypothetically, if say the people who manage the water decide to not manage the water anymore, that we wouldn't use the emergency management force to fill that gap. Is that what I'm reading that as? Or what does that mean, that emergency management will not be used in a labor dispute?
I don't know if it was accurate, but the way I read that was they couldn't shut down the water and go on strike
Strike, I think, is what it said.
because they didn't like a election outcome or an action of the city or something to that effect. Maybe I totally misread it.
So does
I'm gonna ask our attorneys to reply on that.
This Joel's here, he may know the history behind this ordinance, but it's kind of awkwardly worded, so just by raising it, Chair, we may need to go back to it to make sure that we're very clear what it's supposed to mean.
And just as you're talking, I pulled up the state statute on this issue. And so what it indicates in the state statute language, and I think we could adopt this perhaps for clarification of the ordinance. It just simply indicates that no organization for emergency management established under this chapter shall participate in any form of political activity, be employed directly or indirectly for political purposes, or be employed in a legitimate labor dispute. So I think it's probably, and perhaps Joel has more historical context on why that was adopted originally, but I'm sure it's to protect the lawful ability of employees to strike without fear that a city is going to engage its emergency management forces to somehow counteract that lawful striking activity.
That makes sense, actually.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. I don't know if that language makes sense to anyone, or if we would like to see that clarified somehow, or if we want it clarified. Or...
I move that we clarify that language.
Yeah, okay, I second that. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. One said nay. It was member Niceton.
Can you clarify the motion?
The motion was to clarify the language of 228 for what does nor shall it be employed in a labor dispute mean? Something more readable. And that brings us to the bottom of emergency management. Are there any other comments on emergency management? Okay, can we move forward to chapter 3 then? Economic Development Commission. I was curious, so it looks like this went away and then it came back. Can someone give me the history of that?
No, the Economic Development Commission is advisory to the city council. The Economic Development Authority is the city council, a separate political body. I believe at certain times the council was evaluating who was involved with economic development activities, to what level, whether they were empowered or simply advisory, whether they were standalone or whether the council served in that capacity. The current structure is a hybrid and tries to have both an economic development commission that has particular resident or business expertise in development activities, as well as having the city council serve as the economic development authority to maintain budgetary and financial control of tax dollars in the economic development area. That is probably, there's a large variety of alternatives for cities. Some have, as I indicated, a separate standalone. Some have the council without an advisory committee. I would say the majority of suburban communities that we work with have the city council serve as the economic development authority, and some have an additional economic development commission to get that outside flavor and sense of the business community integrated in to that kind of hybrid, trying to get the best of both worlds. So it's probably gone back and forth over the last 20 or so years, but where we're at right now is consistent with what a lot of other cities are doing or have found out that works best for them. We've had situations about business people who are not residents of the city, and so there's some membership issues there that you can't obviously address with city council members who are required to live in the community they represent. So as I indicated, this is kind of a hybrid trying to capture the strengths of both mechanisms. The Economic Development Authority is set up differently. The Economic Development Commission is an advisory commission, much like the other advisory commissions.
Thank you.
Chair, just to be clear, this is a commission that already exists. We're not establishing a commission by virtue of these edits. We're just memorializing.
When you say it already exists, as in it's been meeting the last 2 years, that kind of exists?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it just didn't have this in the city charter?
If I may, Chair, I think that I can solve some of this mystery a little bit, because at one time we had an Economic Development Commission as the city's archivist. I know these things. We had an Economic Development Commission, then they eliminated that commission and went with a less formal Economic Growth Committee. And then at one point, and that was that council's decision at that time, and then this was removed. It looks like 1987. That does predate me. But, and then over the years, the council has decided to reestablish the Economic Development Commission. And at this time, we realized it never got put back into the code.
Okay.
So the Economic Development Commission has been going on for, I'm guessing, 8 to 10 years. Since we switched from the,
This is just catch up.
this is catch up, because it never got added back to the code when they switched back to having an Economic Development Commission. So just a update.
Thank you for that.
Oversight correction.
This brings to one question, maybe it's answered here, but is the requirement to be on any commission, this or others, is a resident of the city, or can the can others be employed or not employed? Selected.
Yes, sir. Our council can step in, but in my understanding, our advisory commissions such as planning and parks and rec are residents. The only commission that I'm familiar with that you can have someone who may not live in the city but may own a business would be the Economic Development Commission. But there's gotta be that connection to the city through a business, being a business owner.
Okay, yeah. So there is a connection to the city.
Yes.
That clearly spells out, or is it just the practice?
It's kind of in the practice, the statutes for, it's come up in other cities, it hasn't come up in Burnsville, but there is ambiguity in the statutes regarding planning commissions that will review and make effective recommendations on land use matters involving property ownership issues. And so it's kind of an open question, been debated in the legal community for many years about whether residency is a requirement for advisory commissions. The general rule on some of the stuff is if it's purely advisory, the answer is, well, the council can take advice from whoever they want to seek advice from. And if they want to appoint a non-resident, in their judgment, they could probably do that. It gets problematic in certain areas where grant administration or land use decisions are made of whether or not that residency is a requirement. But it's kind of a gray area in municipal legal community.
Yes, please.
If I may, Chair, task force members, currently we do have a city policy that governs all of our commissions are required to be, all of our commissioners are required to be residents except those from the Economic Development Commission, and they do need to either own property or work in Burnsville.
Thank you.
So it can be work in
Yeah.
Burnsville. It doesn't have to be owner
Correct.
as a connection to work.
Yes, for instance, the general manager of Ames Construction may not live in Burnsville, but he could serve on this board.
Thank you. Other comments on chapter 3? I will note that it appears that all the numbering is the numbering right, or I'm probably wrong because we're entitled to chapter 3, so ignore that. I apologize. Other comments on chapter 3? Okay, chapter 4, the police department. I assume.
I am at 243, kind of, and 244. As I understand it, the chief of police reports to the city manager, but this says that the council determines the number of officers. Is that true? And do they have no other authority other than through the city manager?
Chair and task force members, yes, that is true. The police chief reports to the city manager. By virtue of adopting a budget, the council determines essentially those staffing levels or what are authorized. So kind of in a roundabout way, I would say they would fulfill that role in 2.2-4-4.
Okay. We don't have, maybe luckily what Minneapolis has, as far as numbers of people. But yes, the purpose in 243, when I read this, I said the purpose of the police, the last couple of phrases, enforcement of city ordinances, which made me think the police are going to come out and tell you to mow your lawn. So is that what we want, or am I misreading?
So,
Please.
Chair, all violations of city code are misdemeanors. So it is a tool in the toolbox that that violations against city code could be prosecuted as a misdemeanor. As a practical matter, the city, for one, the city has a administrative process for code enforcement. So that's kind of the example you gave with weeds, and so that's a tool in the toolbox. There are some times where city code violations are prosecuted as misdemeanors, and so that's what this would be referring to.
So they enforce it only if there's already an official charge against someone? If it's a misdemeanor, someone is charged as
Yeah, it would be, yeah.
district, whoever, county attorney. I assume.
The police department is the investigating, arresting, and charging entity for state statutory violations as well as municipal ordinance violations within the city. Other city officials have been empowered to issue citations in other limited areas. But for general law enforcement investigations, arrest, citation, those actions are initiated by the police department in the majority of cases.
Can city attorneys have charges filed?
Yes, the city attorney's office can issue a summons and complaint to initiate a civil or criminal legal proceeding. So that is one mechanism by which the enforcement measure can be brought. Citations generally are issued by only the authorized designated employees of the city police department, code enforcement officials, building officials, fire marshal, and we designated that in other aspects of the code that we previously addressed.
When you say citation, you don't mean do you mean a misdemeanor or do you mean a violation of the city code?
Well, the citation is just a charging device that notifies the individual that they are being charged with a particular violation. The underlying violation is either a state statute or a city code provision. So the citation is just a mechanism by which people are informed of the criminal charge. Similarly, a summons and complaint, which is a much more formal and longer document, informs an individual that the state of Minnesota, through its designated enforcement agencies, city, county, or whomever, are preferring charges against that individual as detailed in that summons and complaint. The citation is just a one card, it's like a postcard version of a larger device.
It's what you get likely for a moving violation.
A parking ticket is a form of citation. But we generally, for felonies and higher level charges, where you want to lay the foundation, the basis of probable cause, and indicate why the charge is warranted, you would charge that out by a summons and complaint that includes the narrative. The citation is just basically a checklist kind of bullet points explaining what happened where, what the violation was, without a lot of great narrative detail.
Thank you. Ms. Coughlin?
Thank you. And I just wanted to add, I know we haven't reached it yet, but there are city code violations that are more typically enforced by the police. And they're more so like our parking ordinances, which would be petty misdemeanors. So those are non-criminal violations, but that's something the police department enforces. Additionally, we haven't reached it quite yet, but there's also an ordinance prohibiting certain pawn shop violations. Typically, the police would get involved. For example, if somebody pawned an item that they did not have permission to have, typically related to a theft case. For example, if they took a vacuum cleaner from a retail store and then they pawned it for money, that would be a criminal ordinance violation. So I just wanted to mention that not all of the ordinances are kind of code enforcement violations in nature, although the police department does always stand by and they're ready to assist in the event that code enforcement officials need support, in order to conduct a property code inspection in a safe manner. But typically the way the police are getting involved in terms of enforcement of the city code is more so the parking ordinances, the pawn shop ordinance. Those are the main ones that they would focus on. So.
Good to know, otherwise it feels a little heavy-handed.
Absolutely, that's a good point.
Mr. Ryan?
Yeah, 2-4-4 personnel. I saw that it was struck out. The special police programs thing, the participants for that. I guess I was just curious about the behavioral health unit. That's not considered that's a part of Burnsville. It wouldn't be considered a special police programs because I thought that was they have, I believe, a mental health specialist from the county.
Chair and task force members, yeah, I think we don't categorize them as special police programs. I mean, this is just part of the services that we provide based on the community's needs and how we've staffed it. So it doesn't impact any of the practical operations.
Okay. Other comments on chapter 4? I was curious on, I believe it is 246. And then I guess it'd be part of B. Task member Roush made a comment, suggested strike through, it's pretty much the last sentence or second to last sentence of or misdemeanor with a jail sentence. And then I noticed that up above it said that this language is required by the BCA. So can council comment, should the language of or misdemeanor with a jail sentence remain in the city code?
That's to the task force and the council to determine it. The part that's required by the BCA is the first part that authorizes background checks for certain purposes. They were looking for local decision-making to enable to them to do the background checks, and we'll make the computers available for that purpose. The second part at the end prior to the highlighted in red portion are the stricken languages and part of the mandatory part. So that's at the discretion of the task force in the city.
So I think related to that, can someone educate me on the difference between a gross misdemeanor and a misdemeanor that's not gross but requires a jail sentence?
So I used to prosecute for 5 years for the city of Burnsville, so I can answer this question. So there's a petty misdemeanor that's not a criminal violation. That's a parking ticket, for example. There's a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor is generally punishable by up to $1,000 fine and or a 90-day jail sentence. So a misdemeanor with a jail sentence would mean that after you went through the whole criminal justice system, you were sentenced to some jail at the end. That doesn't always happen for misdemeanor level offenses, since they're lower level offenses. Often just a fine is assessed. A gross misdemeanor offense is a more serious offense that comes with either a $3,000 fine and or up to 1 year in jail. And then with your felonies, you can really go anywhere beyond that 1 year and 1 day jail sentence in terms of penalties. So it could be 20 years, it could be 30 years. What your ultimate sentence is, even if you're charged with a misdemeanor, really depends on the type of violation it is. So for example, with a lot of these city code violations, we're not seeing jail time assessed, certainly, because the goal most of the time is simply to correct whatever the issue was, be it a fire code violation, a building code violation. You may see jail time on misdemeanors when they rise to a much more serious level, such as domestic assault, for example. There would be jail time attached to an offense like that.
Can you clarify? So like domestic assault, would that typically be charged as a misdemeanor, or would that be charged as a gross misdemeanor?
It does depend. So yeah, it depends on your general starting point. Could be a misdemeanor offense. It depends on the severity of the injury involved. It also depends on the person's criminal history. So under Minnesota law, a domestic related offense is considered an enhanceable offense, meaning that if you've committed previous domestic related offenses in the past and you've been convicted, such as restraining order violations, domestic assault violations, it could really range based on behavior. It could be a stalking violation, for example. If you've done that in the past, if you commit another violation within 10 years, you're looking at a gross misdemeanor. 3 of those violations within 10 years is going to put you at the felony level for a domestic assault offense. Of course, a domestic assault offense could start out as a felony if it involved more serious injury to the victim.
Or strangulation.
or strangulation, which is serious injury to the victim, but it is a felony offense to strangulate somebody in a domestic relationship.
I'm gonna ask you maybe an unfair question or any counsel, but is there, all the things that you mentioned, domestic assault, are there any like, when I think about someone getting pulled over for a speeding ticket, I don't think of that as a serious offense or a parking violation. Is there anything that someone would get charged for that would get classified as a misdemeanor that by the common person's definition, we think that that's not I'm trying to delineate between something like domestic abuse and, well, you didn't mow your grass and then you parked on your neighbor's lawn.
Yeah, so it could range from a lot of things. A less serious misdemeanor, in my view, would be something like driving after revocation. So you were driving with a license that was revoked. No harm was done to any victim or person or property. And so in that way, that's generally going to be treated, much less seriously than a domestic assault misdemeanor, which is probably your most serious misdemeanor other than DWIs, for example, which also could be a misdemeanor offense.
Thank you.
If I can, so part of the premise of this is for when somebody makes application for a permit or a license or city employment, these are the factors that we look at, right? And so there are two factors. One is if there was a conviction and what the level of conviction is, and how does it relate to the application or the level of the employment being sought. So there's a proximity, I guess, and if I'm using that legally correctly, but there's a proximity that we do as an evaluated basis, as well as the freshness test. That's definitely not a legal term, but how old is the violation and how closely does it align with the application that has been made?
Yes.
I appreciate that we don't want to get all bogged down, you say, in a bunch of speeding tickets from 20 years ago. But I am reading this that both the crime has to relate to the license sought and the way that it's proposed here is either a felony or gross misdemeanor. To me, it seems like the city would be better served if there was a way to generally have it relate to the license sought. If you're gonna hire a snowplow driver, maybe the driving record, even though it's all misdemeanors, really is directly related to that. Or, I don't know all the reasons you get licenses, but there are a lot of things that are misdemeanors that some people might think are like serious kinds of things as they relate to these.
Can I ask a kind of a question? So I know this is about police specifically in this chapter, but then you applied this generally to individuals in the employment of the city who are licensed. So I assume that would be police, firefighters. I believe that the people who manage the water are licensed. Are there other people who are licensed?
So it's for city permits, city issued licenses, or if any provision of our code requires you to register with the city for maybe a distribution of material or something like that, or city employment. So when we look at city employment, we would again use those two standards of how recent was the violation, how serious was the violation, and does it tie to the employment being sought? So it's an iterative process, I would say.
Thank you. I'll recognize Shelley first, and I'll get right to you.
It's right in there that it's directly related to the license sought and that there's an and. I don't necessarily think we should be ruling out misdemeanors because misdemeanors, whether they're gross or not, can be very telling. I think that that's probably going to restrict the city's ability to refrain from hiring individuals who might otherwise pass them.
Or issue a license to them.
Right.
This comes up most frequently in liquor and massage therapy licensing.
Steve, can you?
So, okay, I put the comment down. I want to emphasize what your point was. It's for licenses. It's not just employment. Let me say it again. It's not just to become a police officer. It's if you want to have a concert on Buck Hill, you probably have to get a license. And my bias is, I don't want somebody that's done a little bit of jail time for misdemeanor to be not able to conduct business or have a successful career or whatever that might be. So that's why I struck that. I agree on felonies and a lot of things, but I just, to be an inclusive society, there's also people that have done a little bit of time, and I think we should let them hit the reset button. So that was my why I put it.
No, I like that. I'm sorry. My speaking after. I mean, I like that because inclusivity, and I think that's where the age is really important to look at. Did they do it yesterday, and is it related to a noise violation at their last event? Yeah, maybe worth considering. But I think maybe even if we establish a time frame for guidance in there or add that, that might help address it.
Okay.
I know it's a question to you, actually, since it was your comment and concern.
I personally wonder if this is something where the policy and its implementation versus the code is where I think maybe we're fine. And what I would suggest is, I'll say that I don't think that probably a police officer or a person who's applying to be a police officer who served jail time for domestic assault should be a police officer. And so that's a much different scenario than the person who wants to have a concert on Buck Hill. And I would hope that the city would recognize that and to take that into consideration. And I think what I've heard is they do.
Yes, Chair and task force members. In fact, for police officers go through a very in-depth, very perhaps invasive background before they would get to the point of being offered a position. So there's a lot of stringent standards there. I hear what task force member Roush is saying. From a practical perspective, we don't have anybody from our licensing department here, but I would say, well, you want to speak to it, Mac? How often do we decline or deny somebody a license? Or
It's very rare that we decline a license because of this, and the relevance factor, right? If somebody's applying to be a massage therapist and we find out that they have a misdemeanor for stealing $20 from the convenience store they worked at as a teenager, right? That's maybe not relevant to their massage license. But if they have a misdemeanor for working without a license, that would apply. Like working as a massage therapist somewhere without being licensed, then that would be a violation that would apply.
Chair and task force members, just to underscore the city manager's point, certainly recency and relevancy on the employment side of things are the two factors considerations that our staff work through. This portion of the code under the BCA standards allows us to do employment checks internally. This is on the staff side of thing, a current topic of research and conversation about what our future practices might look like. What I can say is to the conversation among the group, one of our priorities from a city employment background check perspective is that there are no bright line rules. We look at the situation, we look at the job, we look at the individual and the information that we have, and would walk through the steps as they're outlined here from that perspective.
Thank you.
Which I appreciate that the city would do that. For instance, I am guessing the misdemeanor charge, a small amount of marijuana would not be appropriate for most any, and that this section is really giving the police the authority to conduct these background checks. As I understand, it can be any city employee, and maybe all are required to have some sort of criminal background check. So it's just to be clear that it's fairly broad, which is why I guess I would I feel a little uncomfortable having in city code exactly what will be considered and what won't. I don't know, do we have to have anything that the crime directly related to the license sought,
You could put a period. there.
period,
You
would
could put a period there.
then
That'd be
get us
fair.
away from defining any, this particular misdemeanor or that.
That would put it pretty close to what the statute provides.
Okay. That would be my,
So if I take what you just said there, then perhaps that sentence would say, except for the provisions set forth in Minnesota statute section 364.09, the city will not reject an application for a license on the basis of the applicant's prior conviction unless the crime is directly related to the license sought, period. And then we would remove the remainder of that sentence. I'm seeing several people nod their head, and so I would certainly entertain a motion to that if someone would like to make it.
So
Okay, is there a second on that motion? Okay, so it was moved by member Roush, seconded by Godin. And all those in favor, I'll restate the motion, all those in favor of modifying the sentence to remove specifically, and the conviction is for a felony or gross misdemeanor or misdemeanor with a jail sentence. Signify it by saying aye and raise your hand. Aye. All those opposed, vote nay and raise your hand.
Nay.
Okay. The ayes have it. Any final items on chapter 4? Chapter 5, fire department. Least controversial department in here. Oh,
I had this question in my thing, but this to me says that our fire department provides no medical assistance, which seems different from many EMS these days. So is it just not in here in the
can you
purpose?
tell me where, or you're just saying it's just not?
Well, I'm guessing in 253 would be where it might be noted.
Okay,
Chair and task force members, it's just not noted in here. Yeah, we have our own ambulance license. We provide that full service ambulance as part of our operations.
And the fire department in particular does that.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
then I might make a suggestion that we just add a phrase or something about that in the purpose of
yes,
this check.
We could offer some language
Okay.
for the next meeting.
okay. I would be satisfied with that personally, but.
I was just wondering if that was covered under the protection of life already, and if that was a necessary change or clarification.
That just says against fire, though.
Right,
I don't know.
protection of life and
Fires.
property against fire.
Yeah, there's a comma. Suppression of fires, the protection of life and property against fire. You're
It's
right.
all about fire.
Okay.
But you come out, I assume, for heart attacks and strokes and
More so than many other cities.
Yeah, so I think the consensus would be if the city could propose some language for next time. Someone takes that as an action. Thank you. Yes,
I think in 252.
Okay.
Does the fire chief report to someone?
Me. City, all departments report to the city manager.
Okay.
Oh, maybe we just want to have the same language as we have under the police.
Subject to the general supervision of the manager.
Yeah.
Right, but it's
City manager, I think it's the language that's under.
Okay.
I think that would be a good insertion. Other things? Yes, Steve.
255, can you explain this one?
I can. So Minnesota has a strong history of volunteers / paid on call fire departments. There are pension benefits eligible for those members that serve as a paid on call firefighter. There is also what's called PERA, which is the Public Employees Retirement Association, and that is our public pension account, and there's a public safety component of that. Our staff is eligible for that public safety para benefit. What this says is that you are not eligible to receive another pension as a volunteer firefighter. And I'm gonna pause right there, because you wouldn't be allowed to serve in two organizations and basically get two pensions for the same time.
Can I ask a question then? So does Burnsville have volunteer fire department members? No?
No.
So it really isn't applicable.
Since about 1981, which is the origin date of that particular paragraph, this was a transitional paragraph. It still has vitality today for people who might think they wanted to create a separate relief association or other nonprofit retirement option, or try to figure out a way to double dip a pension. So it's still applicable, but it's less applicable now than it was when the city had paid on call volunteer type department.
And it wouldn't apply to the police?
Police
Same
do not-
double dip.
Police do not have the history of volunteer police and retired relief associations. So it's not been the same type of issue. And like I said, this has a historical vintage
I
that
figured
is
there's something.
on the transition.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask what the difference between fire chief and fire marshal is. I mean,
The shorthand version is the fire chief is head of the fire department. Fire marshal is a specifically designated official under the state fire code to investigate arson and other specific related duties. Generally consistent to have a separate fire marshal from the fire chief in most cities.
when you guys like design roads and stuff like that, is that like, is a fire marshal one that is like, okay, if it's big enough for the trucks, or is that like?
In many cities, the fire marshal is part of the development review process to determine fire lane existence, access, location, and design features. That is correct.
Thank you. Other comments on chapter 5? Moving to chapter 6, Parks and Natural Resources Commission. Comments on this?
I would just like to note that there was a citizen who suggested that we had recreation in here, and I wanted the city to somehow respond to that. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other. I assume someone is doing recreation in the city. I don't know if we want these people in charge.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Chair and task force members, I'd want our staff that are a little more acquainted with this, but I think largely our PNRC really deals with natural resources and parks facilities or parks assets rather than the recreational functions that we do provide.
Okay. If someone else has that, like a city department maybe.
You got it. Yep.
Who can you just educate us? Who is in charge of recreation?
Sure. So we have a we have a recreation and facilities director. And that gentleman oversees our recreational as well as functions, as well as our overall facilities, as well as capital plans for those facilities. And then the maintenance falls under our public works department. So the mowing and the day-to-day maintenance falls under that operation. They work very closely together.
Thank you. Other items in chapter 6. I'll put member Walls on the spot and ask and member Ward on the spot and ask if you feel like your comments and questions have been resolved regarding members. I see there's a lot of highlighting and slashing through. I'm not quite sure what the answer is. Yes.
As I read the comments, I think it would be good for us to just maybe take consistent language that we have for other advisory commissions and replicate that within PNRC. There's 6 members, 1 alternate, and 1 youth, and 2 youth, up to 2 youth members. We want to maybe clarify that. So we could have some consistent language to reduce that confusion. Okay.
That's historical, having youth on it?
Well, for the last 3 years.
I think they've been around.
Goes back a little longer than that.
Yeah.
The council adopts policy changes that sets the number of members.
And they wanted some youth.
They did that many years ago. They tried to do a youth council and it was not successful. So they thought that if the kids had something that they were more interested in, they would participate
Got it.
for it. And that's why we now have youth members on the parks.
Thank you. Other comments on this chapter? Okay, I think that will, I will pause and say, is there anything else in Title II? Otherwise, I believe the next time we review Title II, we will be reviewing final language for approval. Okay, so that brings us to item 7, which is the intro to liquor licensing. I've been looking forward to this. Ms. Collins is our presenter, and she will give a presentation. This is the introductory presentation on liquor licensing regulations by City Clerk Michael Collins. This is to help us in our review of Title III, Chapter 1 for the December meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and task force members. This is just meant to be like an introduction to liquor licensing. And because some people may be more aware or less aware of some of the terminology. And so basically I'd like to start up. I think the problem is we've got the cart in front of the.
Oh, there it goes.
let me-
There it just advanced.
If I just, oh, it did? Oh. So basically in liquor licensing, we have like on sale liquor licenses and we have off sale liquor licenses. On sale liquor licenses are when you're consuming alcoholic beverage on the premise, like at a restaurant, bar restaurant, that type of thing. There's different kinds. You can do restaurants, brew pubs, bowling centers are licensed a little differently, hotels, that type of thing. There are also what we call 3.2% malt liquor licenses. And that's like, you've heard of 3.2 beer. So lower level alcohol, there's a different license for that specifically. Wine license, if you have a wine license by itself, you could serve wine, or sometimes people have a wine and beer license, right? And they're temporary, like nonprofits do fundraising, like wine tastings, that kind of thing. So they're temporary liquor licenses, and those are all on sale licenses. Off sale is when you like go to a liquor store and purchase a bottle of liquor and take it back to your house, that kind of thing. You're not consuming it on the premises. So this is your typical liquor store. And then also the grocery stores, convenience stores, and those types of things can sell those 3.2% malt liquor beverages. The 3.2 beer, it also includes some things like White Claw, those kinds of, the lower alcohol level things that can actually do. Any questions?
It was actually related to that, because when you mentioned White Claws, thinking about strong beer and some of the craft beers and the White Claws and the seltzers that are out there, they're all typically about 4 to 5%. So do they have to be below 3.2 as a hard line?
And it's 3.2%, however the city, but as long as it's not more than, there's some 4% by volume or 3.2, I can't remember exactly how this goes. To tell you the truth, the state tried to explain it to us and they were like, you actually have to like measure the something and this, they told me that like a White Claw would count as a 3.2% malt beverage because the actual alcohol by volume is less than whatever. And that was something new. None of us had ever, we were in a room full of liquor licensing people and we had never heard that before. So they're discovering some new things with some of the new products they have out there now. So there are different things that are gonna be allowed under that, but those are the types of things that are typically sold at your local grocery store or convenience store.
Question?
Yeah.
So growlers, where do those sit?
So now, if a growler would be an off sale, right? Because you take that home with you.
Right.
And there are specific liquor license in regards to growlers, and it has to be like a certain bottle size and that type of thing. So, but they do have to have an off sale growler license
Really?
to sell the growlers, yes.
When I scanned through this, I came up with a thing called Bottle Club.
Mhm.
What is Bottle Club here?
I'm gonna, and that's different, so I'll get to that here in a little bit. So generally, the statutes give the cities the right to regulate liquor license in their city, right? So that's why we do this. And they also regulate some of we can have stricter standards in the statutes, but we can't have less strict standards, right? We can't say it's all right to sell hard beer in a grocery store under a 3-2 license, that kind of thing. So here's where Burnsville is more restrictive. I noticed that, and this is a minor thing, right? The statute requires a capacity of 30 plus seats. We require a dining area of 750 square feet. I don't know, I'm not even sure if that would be more restrictive or less restrictive. It's just a difference in the standards there, in the minimum. Now, here we're talking about the bottle club, right? So we specifically prohibit consumption and display, AKA a bottle club license in Burnsville. And I went and did a quick survey of as many cities in Dakota County that I could find, and all of them allowed it. So we were the only city I could find that did not allow it.
What is it?
It's basically, so we actually had somebody come to me recently and ask me for this consumption and display permit. And it would be for Cheers Pablo, right, where you go and you paint. And they don't want to carry a liquor license anymore. They want to have a consumption and display so that they can allow somebody to bring a bottle in and drink it on premise.
So it is like setups is
Yes.
what I,
Yes.
my.
And like
No, it's.
some of the brew pubs and stuff, right? They also can have a consumption and display so that you could, like you were having an event at their place, you could bring in wine. So because they only serve beer, right? So you could bring in wine.
So tell me how weddings would work. So could you, if the code allowed consumption and display, if, let's say one of my children got married, could I bring in my own wine?
Okay, so if that venue had a consumption and display permit, then the answer would be yes, and they would typically charge you, you've heard of, what is it, corking fees, right?
Yep.
They would typically charge you corking fees for that. However, when it comes to weddings, what's very typical is caterers, right? So the city doesn't license caterers, but caterers have a catering liquor license many times. Not all do, but most do.
Okay.
As a caterer, they can obtain this catering liquor license from the state, and then they're allowed to serve liquor with the meals as part of it. It needs to be, they can't serve, it can't be like mostly liquor and a few pretzels on the side, right? The liquor needs to be like a small.
Accessory to the food service.
Yes, there you go. Good word, Joe.
Okay.
So how does that work in a situation where they have a bar open for an hour before the reception? That couldn't happen under this sort of a license, correct?
The venue would have the license, wouldn't
The
it?
venue would have to have an actual license.
Or they would hire a caterer.
Or they would hire, but a caterer then could be licensed if they have open bar before the meal. That's considered incidental to the food
Typically,
service.
an open bar is something where somebody's paying for it.
Right,
So it's just maybe not the people who are attending the event.
right.
So it's the same as if it was not an open bar, It's still being, the sales are still there.
And you said most of the surrounding cities allow,
I couldn't find another city that prohibited it.
prohibited it. Okay. They
We're the
allow
only
it.
ones that I found that prohibit the consumption of display permit.
Do you have any history around why we chose to do that?
I actually looked. And back in 1984, we changed the statute so that it had this language in there, and there was no indication of why. So unfortunately,
I graduated that year. I'm sorry.
unfortunately, I looked it up, there was no indication of why that was put in there. None at all. I wish I could tell you, but sometimes I ask myself that same question, Shelley, and so I go back and I try to look up, why did they do this? Was there a reason behind it? And there was none indicated. So it could have just been as a pleasure of the council.
Okay.
I also wonder if that was a natural progression of them phasing out setup bars in the state in general, because I think the whole setup concept in Minnesota has pretty well been phased away. I think I went up to like Cross Lake or one of those, and there was one left up there, and it was a kick. It was fun, but I think that was probably a natural progression of that just being phased out as a statewide thing.
They have fallen into disfavor because they don't effectively manage the consumption of that alcohol. It's not being dispensed by the licensed individual, so the dram shop exposure is uncontrolled.
That was my thought exactly. I think that the insurance companies have kind of said, we're not going to insure you for this, and that's probably why they don't exist anymore. All right. Now, probably more controversial are the things that we have in our liquor license stricter than state statute, such as other than in the Burnsville Center retail area, which is a specific defined area, we require all of our off-sale buildings to be a freestanding building, and it requires them to have at least a 3/4 mile separation from each other. And this is something that came about decades ago. I think that it was put in place, number one, to kind of, so that there wouldn't be 3 liquor stores right next to each other, right? But it also kind of protected the business owners from their competition moving in right across the street.
I think Burnsville also had a strong history of strong aesthetics requirements in their code, so that was probably a component as well.
Right, that,
And Charlie Creighton wanted the brick,
If you're gonna have alcohol, make it pretty.
not only separate, but
We call it Burnsville brick.
oh, 80, it was 81. That's when it, I thought it was 84. So in 81, we adopted the ordinance that didn't allow the bottle plugs. In 1981, we adopted an ordinance that did allow it. In 1983, we adopted another ordinance that prohibited it. So,
Something else.
like I said, when I surveyed, I called Lakeville, Apple Valley, Farmington, Hastings, all of those cities in Dakota County, not the tiny ones, but the others, and all of them allowed for it. Another 1996, the council considered eliminating the freestanding building requirement, and they did not. After it was like an ordinance that was brought to the council, and they received some public testimony, and they did not eliminate it at that time. In 2002, it was reconsidered again. 2009, they reduced it from 1 mile separation to 3/4 because at that time, the existing liquor stores that we had would not comply with the 1 mile rule. Some of them were a little less than a mile. And they said, well, if we reduce that to 3/4, then they're all in compliance. And so they did that. They also established the Burnsville Center retail area at that time. And that was so that in this very commercial area of our city, we thought that there was no need to have that sort of separation. So they established this area where it would be allowed. It wouldn't be required to have a freestanding building, and they wouldn't be required to be that 3/4 mile distance separated. In 2015, we removed the cap on the number of licenses. It used to be set at one liquor store for 5,000 people. So like right now, we'd be entitled to 12 with 64,000 people. If we had 65,000 people, then we would have been allowed to have 13. But at that time, they said there's really no reason for us to have a cap anymore, and they removed that. And they did consider the distance and building requirements at that time also, and kept them in place. And in 2016, they removed the freestanding building and 3/4 mile separation for the brew pubs, because they kind of figured that that was not the same. Even though they had off sale in the forms of growlers and that kind of thing, it was not the same type of operation as a liquor store. So they didn't want to lump them in with all off sale. So they removed those requirements for that. And here's like a little map, and I put this in your background with all the legends and everything, but I just wanted just a little snip here. You can kind of see there's very little opportunity to have an additional liquor store in Burnsville. You can see the red is the commercial zones, and there's very little. There's like the little tip where, what do we call that? The Mr. B's car wash.
For Review Center.
Is right there on 13 and Diffley. That would be one location. It looks like we have one location kind of right there. I mean, there might be something. It's really very limited as to where another one could be established. And so unless one of these is no longer in business, I think there's over by the State Farm Building on Cliff Road. I think that would also be available, that kind of thing.
Max, can I ask 2 questions? The diagonal bar, is that the Burnsville, is that considered it's like the?
That's the Burnsville Center retail area, right? So that doesn't count.
Okay, but then,
For the distance requirement.
but I'll actually just point on the map. I'm just curious, I'm interpreting the rules right. Could someone put a liquor store right here? Because it's not in here, and do the proximity of these influence this?
No,
So it's like,
No,
if
they
you want to put
couldn't
it
or
in a
no?
liquor store, it's like pretty much right here, and that's it for the rest of the city?
well, there's a few areas, like I said, but it's very limited. I know that like when you look down here in the corner, you see one that's closer than 3/4 of a mile to the retail area, correct? So that is allowed, but that was an existing liquor store before the Burnsville Center retail area was created. So Joel, do you know if it works the other direction? We
Well,
haven't had it
sorry.
come up.
Could another one locate in the Burnsville Center within that circle?
If it was outside the Burnsville Center area, but did not intersect with the circle,
So where Andrew is pointing
Like-
before.
this,
Yeah.
that would be allowed?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think it would fit, given the circumference that's shown, or the diameter of the circles, but
What's that?
be close.
Nicola, looks like Nicola to me. So that is, that would be like the Domino's,
McAnderson.
not Domino's,
Yeah, that's
McAndrews,
probably-
and Nicola, Domino's, that area.
Two shop.
Aloha Monkey, yes.
Aloha Monkey.
The rugged side.
Question.
Can you go
Yes.
back 1 second to the map? So you mentioned that, I think it looks like number 3, I have to admit, I need new glasses, but down in that lower corner where Andrew was pointing, where you've got 2 in the same circle there. If the current licensee were to sell the business, could a new owner apply for a license for that location and receive one, even though it's within 3/4 of a mile?
Okay, so let me just make sure I understand what you're saying.
The 2 on the bottom right.
So they're actually, so
you
this
get over
building is not within 3/4 of a mile of this one.
Right, it's the retail center to the left.
So it's fine there.
Mhm.
So if this one's the one you're talking about,
And
if this
4?
one's sold, could they reestablish
number?
here? And the answer is yes.
What about number 4, Michelle?
But 4 is, yeah, I mean,
Four's in the retail center, so they don't have any requirements.
Is that Blue Max, whatever it is?
Yes.
This is Blue Max here,
Okay.
this is Fireplace.
I just wanted to understand how that worked.
Okay.
Like, in that index, that blue hatch is called a satellite, and the red inside is called the Burnsville business area, something like that. What is difference
This is an
between?
old map, but this is the map they used to create the Burnsville Center area, right? So this was an existing map I used that would kind of help. Technically, yes, all of this blue, including the red, is the Burnsville Center retail area.
So there's only one area, it's only one designation now,
Right,
not the two. Okay.
I'm not sure why the red is even there. It shouldn't apply to us in this situation.
And it's called satellite.
It-
That was
I
confusing.
tried to fix that and I couldn't get it
Okay.
right.
Okay, that's okay.
But it's,
You forgive them.
yes, the blue is the Burnsville Center area. Any other questions? All right, so in here I also went and did a little survey of some other cities to find out if they have these same, other cities have these same restrictions. And there are some other cities in the metro that I found that had, like Blaine has a 1 mile. Burnsville's the 3/4 mile, and our exceptions is of course the Burnsville Center retail area. And Coon Rapids has a 1/2 mile. Cities that have municipal liquor, of course, that wouldn't apply to them because they wouldn't restrict their own city municipal liquor stores. So that wouldn't apply. And then the other cities I found did not require the separation. I could not find another city that required a freestanding building.
Meaning it's not in a shopping center when you say freestanding?
Right, it can't be in a shopping center or attached. So for instance, let's say even if the Cub downtown was not close to Red Lion, they couldn't establish a liquor store there because in their building like the Cub on 42 has, because it would not be a freestanding building, it'd be within an existing building.
I have a couple of questions. How much revenue does the city get from licensing?
Well,
Liquor
licensing, I don't know I mean, I could probably do some quick math, but.
Like order of magnitude, over $100,000?
So we have, I believe 27 on sale liquor licenses that we get approximately $8,100 a piece for. And then we have some of the smaller beer and wine licenses. Those are more like a wine license is more like $1,500. I'm just guessing off the top of my head because I don't have all those figures with me. Beer license is probably like $750, something like that. So it's like $2,000 or $2,500, somewhere in there for like a wine and beer license. The off-sale licenses, I haven't even looked that up recently.
So under $500,000.
It's really not even, right?
I'm trying to think, we waived the fees. Oh, that was just for.
Just for on sale,
On-sale,
right?
yeah.
And but off sale is really, I don't have that in front of me, but if I had to guess, I'm thinking 300. Do we know 300?
I'm gonna see if I
I'm
can
looking
find it
forward
in the
here,
budget
but
real quick.
it's, yeah, it's somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000.
So how much staff power then? Like, how many full-time people do you have doing this?
So we had one half-time person, and they're not with it, and me, right? That was administrating this, and now we have a full-time person and me that are doing this.
It doesn't include any of the training that we may do for our licensees or any of the other kind of ancillary services as businesses might need help. So just for the licensing component.
Sure.
So
Sure.
our police department has conducted best practices trainings and those types of things to help our liquor licensees to make sure this is what you need to do, best practice to make sure you're not selling to minors and that you're not serving to minors, those types of things.
Is that training required of all licensees, or is it, offenders who've maybe made a mistake?
So we do have a best practices program, and I think that like I said, the lady who's best at this is no longer with us, so I'm struggling a little bit to get caught up on all of these details, but I know we do have a best practices program. I believe that we are requiring everybody to participate in it.
You get a reduction in your
Yeah, I was
license
gonna
fee
say-
if you do participate, and then if you do have a violation, you have an underage service or something, your penalty can be reduced as, yeah,
That's
because,
what I thought I read, but I wanted to understand that a
Yeah.
little better in context of the cost that.
Yeah.
that,
Is there a way to find out what I guess I'm curious, what our density of liquor store is in Burnsville compared to these other cities?
Compared to other cities.
And the reason why I'm curious is I think that the city, I don't know why it's decided to, this is my opinion, but I don't know why the city has decided to be so heavy-handed with its regulation. It seems like the city could stand to earn a bit more money and spend a little less time and effort drawing the borders on this. I don't think we have to worry about liquor stores running amok in Burnsville because market forces will pretty well self-limit.
There were a lot of people who were concerned.
Yeah.
That things would run amok. You'd have public drunkenness, you'd have urination, you'd have, you name it. I was part of
I
the
think we
group
have all
that,
these towns to
that-
prove that that's not true.
that talked about some of these, the 3/4 mile and other kinds of things. And you'd be amazed how many people are concerned.
and I think if I can, I think that goes back to the complexity of Minnesota's liquor laws. And all the different layers and how they're really hard to decipher because I think there's been some control in place for that.
And since Prohibition, they've evolved in different directions at different times. And so, each city can remain more strict, maybe with their regulations than maybe state statute says, oh, well, now we can allow Sunday liquor license, Sunday liquor sales, correct? But the city could say, we're not gonna allow that in our city, right? They could be more strict, but Burnsville does not, but the city can be more restrictive.
So, real quick, Shelley.
My question for consideration for everybody here is, are we just engaged in a bias against alcohol because it's been considered vice previously? And is that why we're restrictive? Maybe why there was public outcry against it? Not saying that's a bad thing, but just to consider whether there's a bias subconsciously affecting our thoughts in this process.
I mean, there probably is some because it's considered one of the most harmful drugs. I mean, based on research and everything like that. And most of the harm is done to others that I've seen. So I think that's probably what it
Is there
is.
data saying it's mostly done to others, or is that just an opinion? Okay, I don't know.
Weighted in multiple research documents that I've seen,
Okay.
like studies. There's a Lancet one in the UK from 2010. And 2015, the European Union did another review of it, and it showed it was, the Lancet review in 2010 named it the #1 worst drug for as far as harm done to others. And then the 2015 one done by, I believe it was the European Union. I can't remember who.
Perhaps you could dig up those and put them in the Dropbox if
Yeah.
you'd be so inclined. Tim?
But that one shows.
My one thing is, I see where you're going down this path, and then my initial thought process was the same way. The only thing that I'm guarding my thoughts around is that as we've seen, the previous generation of people before us that generated these code had a different mindset than what we do. And what they've done though is they've established a set of rules by which these businesses have to play. So I think if we were to make it even a little bit easier, or to say we're going to eliminate some of these, it might be a disservice to these legacy business owners. For example, one of my is Red Line. That's a newer building. There's a lot of investment in that Red Line liquor store. I think it would be a slap in the face. And this is an arbitrary example. If we were to allow a liquor license to go into the strip mall across the street at Cub Foods. Or, you know what I mean, so I think that's just one point that I want to bring up, because I would like to act on some of these, but I think there's also some historical precedent that we have to be very, very sensitive to, especially with the business community that we're dealing with.
That's a great point, Tim. Go to.
Yeah. when I look at that, what should I, as a society, we should care in liquor? Only thing we can regulate is only underage drinking. Everything else is, you do what you want to do. And then, of course, whatever the state laws. These are the only two things. And the third one that brought up here, I wasn't thinking about is competition. I don't want to say it's good or bad, but I think with a lot of investment that sometimes it's an issue. So these are the only two things that I really care when I go through this. No underage drinking or selling to that, and meet all the state requirements.
I agree, because in my personal opinion, I think that's a really great point about how people have invested a lot of money in freestanding buildings, but we're also looking at the cost of how much it takes to get in, and how I'll say the city has discriminated against small business owners from starting up in this town, because we've said, you gotta pay $1 million to get in. And is that really what Burnsville wants to be? Back to Golden's point, if it's not explicitly illegal, why not? Why should we be overly prescriptive and establish monopolies? I mean, basically, you got 6 places you can sell liquor if you're not in the County 42, economic development zone. That's my personal opinion.
Right, I would agree with that. And I would just come back to that and said that you made me play by rules X. You just made rules Y. How can we fit the bill so that I'm not taking the brunt of having to abide by rules X when I started out or even today. So
yeah.
I just want to make that very sensitive because I were in both right line.
Yeah.
I agree, any change.
I think a couple points. I hear what you're saying. I agree with you. If you would have held Total Wine, Target, and MGM to the same standard, meaning freestanding building.
I think it's that whole
The cost of
corridor.
operating Red Lion, Blue Max is higher because they got a fixed building they're depreciating against instead of in a strip mall on County Road 42. But I think, whether you make a change or not, I think the legislature is gonna look at allowing liquor sales in grocery stores and convenience
You see how
stores.
successful that's been.
So if that passes, all this will change anyways.
I want to make note that we are a little bit over time. I think this is very exciting dialogue, and thank you, Ms. Collins, for presenting this. If there are no immediate questions for her presentation, I think we should come back in December and be prepared to engage in this and put our comments and the feedback and really dig into the meat of this, if that's okay. Yep. I don't want to just cut us off, but I know we could probably spend a good long time discussing what we'll discuss at the next meeting.
Yes, and I just wanted to make sure that you were understanding of how we are different from other cities and maybe some of the history behind how we got to that point and how it's evolved over time. So you can see this, and I'm sure that, we haven't seen a lot of the public at our meetings before, but I suspect that we may have some show up next month.
So we'll move to item 8, which is our miscellaneous item. The next code review task force meeting will be December 15th, 2021, 5:30 p.m. upstairs in the council chambers. This is a week earlier than usual due to the holidays. Our homework is to review Title 3, Chapter 1, which is included in tonight's packet. Task force member comments need to be submitted by Wednesday, December 1st. Are there announcements or any final items of business?
If I might steal a moment, I just wanted to say thank you, everybody. This will be my last task force meeting. I have accepted a new position at a firm in downtown Minneapolis, which I'm excited about the opportunity, but it does close a long chapter here with Burnsville and with my firm, having been there 8 years, and I'm excited for the new opportunities, but also sad to leave my current firm. And I know I was with you a short time, but I appreciate the hard work you're all putting in, especially during your evening hours. You certainly don't have to do this, but citizen comment and public engagement like this is so important in city government. So thank you, everybody, for allowing me to be a part of this process, and I look forward to hearing more about it as I follow it from a distance. So, thank you.
Shanna.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Sean.
If there are no additional items, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay. Motion moved by Ward, seconded by Hull. Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hands. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Raise your hand. Ayes have it. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.